Good. Hello. Thank you for having me. I guess I'll start off by getting the cat out of the hat, and then we can have a proper, honest conversation about artificial intelligence. How many of you know what is AI? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, wow. Now I'm scared. Well, you know, AI is this fascinating thing, ever-changing, that will take over the world. But is it, right? Have businesses been evolving around what they can do, around identifying and quantifying what they can do and generating this thing called data, right? And if some of you saw a talk yesterday, you saw the importance of information in today's world and the importance of having data and information about what we do, how we do it, and how it impacts us. And the fact that probably all of you or most of you have a smartphone either in your hands or in your pocket or in your purse or in your bag right now probably helps track some of the things that you do. It helps understand your behavior and why you do it. So what happens when we try and train an artificial intelligence to understand that data, just like we do? What happens is we need to use sensors that are able to mimic what our senses can do. Right now, I'm speaking to you. Your ears are listening. Your eyes are watching. You're capturing all of this information. Different parts of your brain are processing it, and then they're producing a thought or an action or a reaction, sometimes good, sometimes bad. All of this is what we need to teach machines so that they can learn this. They can learn that something is right, that something is wrong. But it's interesting when we start thinking about machines and everything that we see out there in the media, right? I don't know if some of you have watched this clip, but let's watch it. Yeah, that's the reality, right? That's the bit of the clip that they never show you. They only show you the one attempt out of millions that actually succeeded. And this leads me to a quick survey. How did this video make you feel? And I'm going to give out a few emotions, and I want you to sort of put your hands up so we can sort of test the reaction of the audience. How many of you felt scared? Few hands. How many of you felt inspired? How many of you felt amused? I see a bit of doubt over there. And how many of you are sad? So that's good, right? But ultimately, there are a few elements to evaluate when we see this video. There's a difference on how generations perceive it, because I am still from the generation that grew up without smartphones. So I still had to go to the library to find the book that had the answer in one of its 500 pages to the small question that I wanted to ask. And now you pick up your phone, you speak to Siri or to Google, and they give you the answer. This drastically changes the expectations that us, as human beings, and especially younger generations, have on how technology can aid them. And it drastically changes also the way that it impacts what we can achieve. Because if you connect online right now, you can virtually connect with anyone in the world. This is something that was absolutely impossible, I mean, even 30 years ago. And if I go back 100 years, you'd have to send a pigeon or a message by ship or something like that. There was nothing else, right? Now it's instant. So it reduces our ability to actually tolerate this latency, the time it takes for things to happen. This is ever changing. But you want to know what's really interesting and really fascinates me is the fact that you can do a number of understanding functions through the fact that you're watching and you're listening to me, right? And when you watch that robot, you can see that it's, you know, it's not really very tuned human form. It has a lot of cables coming out. It's not really perfect. And then if I tell you that was one good attempt out of thousands at least, then, well, it's not that good, right? But if you feed that piece of information from that successful jump to a computer, this is what they will see. They will see information. They will see data. They will not see a humanoid robot attempting to do a backflip. This doesn't exist, right? What exists is ones and zeros that put together in different combinations and processed through algorithmic processes generate an outcome or not. So this is a fundamental difference for us to understand how AI is actually changing what we can do, but also how AI is changing who we are. Because to really understand that, we need to start looking and asking the question, because this is what happens with proper AI systems. How good would you be? And this is the game Jeopardy in the US. It was obviously the first mainstream appearance, apart from Deep Blue, from Watson, so IBM's artificial intelligence system. And it won. It beat the two best players in the history of the show. And this was a computer system designed using a few AI techniques and systems. The interesting thing is, how good would you be if let's imagine that you don't get old, and you could spend 100 years reading all of the literature and knowing all of the answers and knowing all of the questions and knowing all of the domains. You'd probably be bored to death, right? But machines don't get bored. So, you know, I see this as brute force. This is what the systems can do. Process massive amounts of data, repeat processes over and over again. If you think about Deep Blue in chess that beat Kasparov, well, he trained on all of the moves. Whatever Kasparov did, the computer had done it already. He'd seen what would come next. And this thing that we have called human intuition, which helps us evaluate and prioritize, this is useful, this is not useful. You keep producing half of the information on every step. Computers don't, they have it there, accessible immediately. So this does fundamentally change what we do have to do, but it does bring out some problems. And before I tell you a story of my journey into discovering the value of artificial intelligence, there's a few things that keep happening, right? One is every time that you read an article on artificial intelligence, there's probably the picture of a killer robot or an evil robot that is going to be threatening you in some way or destroying our world or starting a nuclear apocalypse, right? We need to start being more transparent and more educational with media. And education is an important point that I'll touch on a bit further ahead. The second one is we keep thinking that AI is this malignant brain that hides in a warehouse somewhere in the desert, right? And it's a person, and it wants to be evil or it wants to be good, right? It wants what we want. It wants what we teach it to want. And it's going to optimize towards what we tell it to optimize. So another one that is important to break up. The third one is, can I get a show of hands for those of you that work in a business and you've seen these emails saying your job is going to be replaced by a robot? Show of hands, hands up. Not too many hands. That will change though. But the thing is, you know, robots don't replace the human doing the job. If you have functions that you need to do repeatedly over a day of work, if you deal with a lot of paper, if you deal with a lot of data entry, if you deal with a lot of Excel spreadsheets. We all love Excel spreadsheets, don't we? Maybe not. All of those, you will not have to waste up to 80% of your time actually doing those tasks so you can perform the job that you were actually hired to do, right? Speaking to people, getting that information, and actually getting frustrated because you don't really do what you're intended to do because you get lost in all of the side tasks. Well, imagine that gets removed. This is what we talk about replacing in functions. It doesn't mean replacing the jobs. The job of a doctor is not just looking at medical data. It's to provide care for its patients. And two big ones that emerge now that we've started to take off in terms of use cases, and I'll talk through one shortly. One of them is ethics, right? In that data set that the machine learning algorithm uses to learn what is right and what is wrong, what happens if that data set only has 20% information about women? Will it be able to make the appropriate decision when the subject of that process is a woman? Or when it's an ethnic minority and again the data set doesn't reflect that? And what happens in systems that, for instance, inform judges on whether you should give a repeating offendant possibility of parole or not, when that data set is mostly from those ethnic minorities or different genders? What happens? How accurate is it going to be? And things like ethics are going to be the things that are going to prevent these technologies and the services that leverage these technologies to be equally used by everyone. So it's a tremendously important issue to think about. And you might ask, why would we think about it if, you know, I'm still doing my job and I have a person in front of me. I have common sense. I can make a decision, right? A conscious decision. Interesting word. Well, what happens when it's a system that does millions of those decisions every second, every minute? What happens then? One mistake in that algorithm can result in 500,000 people being excluded. That's tremendous. Imagine if it's voting for something. You've just excluded 500,000 voters. It's approximately like a sixth of the population in Latvia, so that's probably going to have an impact, right? And the final one is competitiveness. Imagine that a few companies are able to leverage these tools so well that they are now able to influence and impact what people read, what people think about matters, what people do, what people buy, right? Imagine in the future, oh wait, it's already happening, right? Brexit, Trump, among others. So it's really important that we are aware of all of these factors and we are educated to understand the information that is being given about all of this. So now I'm going to tell you a story. And this is my personal journey. So I was working for IBM, and being the big company it is, it bought this company called the Weather Channel. And what they have is data. They have real-time data about all of the different weather data points anywhere in the world. Not exactly, but almost. And they sort of gave us access to that data, and they gave us access to all of the different technology systems IBM has, and they said, go find a problem to solve. And they organized the hackathon globally, and they opened this up to all of the employees. They can do anything. They can solve any problem. You just have to use those tools. That was the only rule. And so, you know, having the entrepreneurial spirit that I like to consider that I have, I decided to do what most of entrepreneurs do, be selfish. I'm going to solve my problems first. And then if they're useful for someone else, then that's good. Well, my problem was actually asthma, right? And my asthma was heavily influenced by the weather conditions. And so were these two buddies of mine. One of them, Chris, he's also an asthmatic with different triggers though. And that's actually what actually took us down this path. And Serge, which was our empathetic developer and help us sort of bring some of these crazy ideas to life. So first I want to show hands for who's asthmatic or has someone in their family that is asthmatic. Yes, quite a few hands. Yeah, 16% of the population, statistically speaking, right? And you know, the first thing we did is let's geek out, let's go techie. And so that's my inhaler, and we bought a chip. We stuck it on my inhaler with blue tag. So I don't even know if you know what blue tag is, but you know, it's just, it was clunky, it was ugly, it was dirty, but it was funny because it worked. And what it did is every time I used my inhaler, it captured the geolocation of the place where I used it, right? We did this for a few weeks. And we uploaded all of that information up into a big database on the cloud. And then we added all of the data points of the weather, which means every time I used my inhaler, we had the data points of what was the temperature like in that place, what was the pollen index, what was the humidity, was there wind, what was the pollution level, because you can get that granularity of data in London. And that wealth of information associated to my use of that inhaler allowed us to ask 3 key questions, which if you're an asthmatic, you are going to wonder this at some stage if you haven't already. The first one is, can I identify what are the things that actually push me into an asthma crisis? And can I know that I can't go out and run when it's humid and it's cold? Because I'm definitely going to have an asthma crisis in the evening, and this is my case, right? And that was the first one that we asked. And we used, for those of you who know, an unsupervised machine learning algorithm to be able to detect the micro patterns for me. And interestingly enough, what we created is something that can detect the micro patterns of anyone individually. It doesn't require a doctor to actually take a look at your logs and then tell you, oh, it's probably this that's causing the crisis, right? And the other interesting thing is we then added data from my Fitbit, and now we have exercise data as well, physical activity, movement patterns. This enriches it even better. So it can actually detect. And let's go back to that sort of matrix like letters and characters falling down. The machine doesn't see Hugo struggling with a crisis after he went for a run in the morning and it was wet and it was cold, right? It detects a pattern, and it does number 2, which is the second algorithm, which is let's predict when a crisis is going to occur. And so a machine learning algorithm that predicts the probability of me having a crisis probably in a few hours at the end of the day when I am actually exposed to certain factors and when I need to use my asthma inhaler preventively. So if we've done these 2 steps, what we thought was, well, can we actually recommend preventive treatment rather than Hugo having to try and use the inhaler for a couple of hours and then having to run to emergency services and get someone to give him something stronger. So that was the third algorithm. Let's prevent. And let's use preventive therapy rather than correcting. And when we finished the experiment, even before we actually presented to the jury, I did a bit of research. And you know, we found that 250 million people have to go into these emergency services because they don't have something like this. You'd be surprised at how many entrepreneurs start out to solve their own personal problems, and suddenly they realize, because of the era that we live in, they can actually solve those problems for anyone in the world. And that was very transformational for myself. It was very powerful. But the funny story is when I start taking this idea and go speaking to clients about it. Because, you know, IBM is a for-profit company, and I work in business development, so I have to go and have these conversations with companies. And if they buy the idea, it's great. If they don't, then back to the drawing board. And we started having these conversations, and we went to present to some pharma companies. And when pharma companies listened to this, they were, that's amazing. We love the idea. Now, don't show it to anyone. Hide it. No one can see this, right? They didn't say this, obviously. I'm putting on a little drama. But the key thing is, their business is built to sell volumes of inhalers. It's not built to keep people from having to use the inhalers. So this, for me, was the most fundamental lesson while harnessing technologies like AI and blockchain and others, is actually what this is. This is an inflection point in how we think we can leverage technologies and we can build businesses. We can now build businesses to solve the right problem, not to deal with the consequences of something we haven't been able to foresee and we haven't been able to prevent. And when I look at this even more broadly, I saw that, funnily enough, we've spent the last few millennia trying to go from that craftsmanship, tailor, done by hand, face-to-face, into we need to scale, we need to build platforms, it needs to be mass, it needs to generate billions and trillions in revenue. And you know, this technology might just help us go back to where we were before, being more human, spending more time with each other, and actually addressing our problems, rather than just rebranding the soda with a different flavor and doing a promotion that you send through WhatsApp, right? So it's given us time to do what we really should be doing with our time. I'll tell you another quick story. There was a company in the UK that organizes hackathons for teenagers around artificial intelligence. And one of such hackathons, you know what was the #1 problem that all of them actually identified? It was teenage depression. So kids in school getting depressed because the pressure put on them by what people do in social media, by the shaming that people do using those new digital technologies, and the inability to disconnect from all of that and realize that you have a physical existence beyond those systems, was bringing them down. And they developed an AI machine learning algorithm that worked with a chatbot to help prevent people getting to that stage. How? By identifying in their posts, in their conversations, when they were developing those conditions. And then, not solving the problem, AI doesn't do that, redirecting them to the right person, either in the school or in the family, to actually have a conversation about it, which is how we've always done it, right? And that is why I believe that this technology can actually give us some time back to do what it matters. Instead of the 12 minutes that I have with my general practitioner, in which he spends 10 minutes asking me questions, trying to get some information to figure out why I have the symptoms that I have. That information already exists. Can I actually give it to him? Can he then spend time actually understanding, underlying what is happening, what's happening at home, what's happening at work, what's happening with the family, what's happening in general? How are those things impacting me and affecting me? So this is the big drastic change that we need to make. And some people will ask, well, there are businesses that need to be sustained because that's how jobs are created, that's how economy runs, and it's all about growth, right? Growth, 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 more products, more consumption, more things to buy, more things to do, less time to think and to feel. Okay, that might not work so well. So it's very interesting that the UN developed these 17 sustainability goals, right? And if you look at those goals, you're going to see that most of the businesses that are large multinationals actually impact at least a couple of these buckets. So there is an element of what those companies do that can actually be almost like out of the box repurposed to be able to have a positive impact in that topic. And this is where I think, through what I've seen, that this technology, in combination with other technology and used by humans, can actually change how we see ourselves and how we perceive ourselves. And you know, and there's, in the midst of all of this turmoil and all of this change and all of these cultural challenges, let's call them like that, you see that people start to make decisions, how they call it, with their wallets, right? I'm going to buy products from companies that are responsible, that are sustainable, that are socially aware, and that want to drive this type of impact. So it is super important for everyone to understand this. This is not just about the people developing AI systems that need to do this. It needs to be governments that need to prepare legislation that allows this to occur or forces this to occur in some stages. It's the industries that need to then change what they do. And it's also us. How we educate our children. Yesterday's talk from Petra, I think, talked about one big thing. What are the skills that we need to learn to, let's call it, succeed in the future or be at least an accomplished human in the future? Do you really think that doing 16 years and ending up with a law degree, or that one definitely not, or studying engineering, or being very good in one very narrow field is going to prepare you for the pace of change that is coming? Because right now, the magnitude of these problems are still planet Earth. But imagine when we start replicating this reality in a virtual reality, when we start understanding things like quantum computing, and suddenly you have to manage yourself in 3 places at the same time. Can you even imagine what that is? I really can't. But the mindset and the things you need to capture to be able to do that are going to be drastically different from the things that we've been teaching people to do today, right? Everyone's been taught to perform tasks in an optimal way. Now it's time for us to go back to creativity, to problem solving, and to actually listening to emotions and using our empathy to prepare for what's coming next. And what's coming next, it's going to be brutal, and it's going to be much bigger than any of us think. Thank you.
Thank you. Hugo, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Ja kāds vēl grib kādu pa vārdu pateikt Hugo, mēģiniet viņu noķert. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
One more time.